Hi everyone and welcome to my guide to the Varshan Twisting Blades Rogue. This is a setup that I've been cooking lately based on the boss power setup that I've seen from Macrobio Boy with the new Varshan Power combo. So the way that this works is that you have the Accursed Touch aspect making everything vulnerable permanently. Then you have the Flesh Reaper main power that triggers every time you hit a vulnerable enemy. And then you have the Varshan modifier that triggers every time you trigger your main power. And like this, you can produce a lot of damage, especially in AoE situations where there's many targets and you hit many times a second, producing insane amounts of dot damage. Now, there is a chance that Blizzard is going to patch this relatively soon, so we'll see. They haven't said anything, but it does cause some lag issues. Luckily, not so much on this build here, and also not so much on the Spirit one that I have shown off lately already. But I felt like maybe some people would like to try this build. It is pretty fun and it actually is extremely close in power to the Death Trap Rogue. Now, one caveat here is that the boss damage is definitely lower than the Death Trap Rogue. For example, I've been pushing this to pit 105 on my hardcore setup here, and the boss does take a long time. Death Trap is a very good bossing build, and this is kind of the opposite because it scales a lot with the monster density. So you have a lot of damage when there's more targets, and you have kind of low damage when there's only one target. That being said though, I am able to push a pit 105 plus with this, and more optimized, it could get pretty close to the power of Death Trap actually. And my gear wasn't really min-maxed. I didn't fully invest into like this setup here. I was just mostly doing a bit of a proof of concept. And even so, I was able to, for example, farm pit 85s no problem in like 3 minutes, maybe even 90s or so. And as I said, it can push way past 100 as well. So I'm going to show you the setup here. You can use it for as long as it lasts, and it is actually a really fun way to play Twisting Blades again. It really reminds of the old school new Season 0 Death Trap Twisting Blades setup. I use Death Trap here in this build as a support skill, not as a main damage dealer. And we have Shadow Imbuement on the bar. You get these nice, cool explosions, even though the Shadow Imbue is not really doing the damage. You also have the Frost Novas from the Full Rune, for example, so everything explodes in ice. It just feels good to play this right now, I gotta say. I had a ton of fun with this, so I want to share this with you guys. So let's jump into the setup here. This is the planner that I made. I've been like min-maxing this. I've been trying a bunch of different things. Technically, you can make this work with pretty much any skill. However, what we do care about in this build the most is the number of hits per second and generic damage multipliers. This is how we scale this. You can also see some of the notes here that I put in here, but effectively, this is the only thing that matters. And in that case, Twisting Blades is actually a very good candidate for this. Typically in the past, we had builds like Andaria Rogue that were based on Barrage. We also had Victimized Rogue based on Barrage. All these Lucky Hit builds used to be Barrage, but we don't care about Lucky Hits really. Lucky Hit is relatively weak on Twisting Blades, but very good on Barrage. And we just want to hit as many times as possible. And Twisting Blades can actually hit up to 24 times per second because you have 6 hits per second on your main target. Then you get the return, that's 12, and then you get 2 spins, so that's 24. And that actually makes it so that we can trigger this Varshan power very often. Not only that, but we also put in a vengeful aspect, which produces these arrow storms. You can have 6 arrow storms up, which with that kind of attack speed you will have after a bit of ramping. Each arrow storm hits 4 times a second as well. That's another 24 hits per second. So we're talking about 48 hits per second already on the boss. And then we also have the Umbra Crux spawning the totem, and you can hit that totem, and then every time you hit that totem, you also produce more of those dots on the extra targets. So we're talking about like a single target encounter where we do something like 70 plus hits per second. And then when there's more targets, when you have like a pool of enemies, especially with the Death Trap pulling in the entire screen, you can absolutely destroy everything in density. So when you have more than, let's say, 5 targets or so, the damage really ramps up because we're talking about hundreds of hits per second in AoE combat. And every hit that you do will produce a dot on every surrounding target thanks to the Varshan power. So this is kind of how that works here. And everything else we do is just ramping that to the moon basically. So for example, we have some aspects here to hit more times. We have the Blade Dancers. Then we have the Slice and Dice as well, so we cleave with our Twisting Blades. And not only that, but we also ramp up this 8% increased damage taken buff here. This is also why Twisting Blades is such a good skill to use for this setup. So with 6 attacks per second, you can stack this 18 times on a target. So this is a lot of damage increase. So with 6 hits per second, we can ramp this 18 times on a target. So this gives us something like times 2, times 2.5 or so damage on a single target, and we really need a single target damage. So everything is kind of optimized around boss damage in this setup. Then we have Inner Calm here. This might be a bit surprising. I have Inner Calm on the two-handed. There is also the option to run, for example, Creeping Death, because we have a lot of crowd controls, and also it's very easy to stagger bosses, at least in like farming scenarios. So I have like the farming setup here where we run this instead. But I noticed that especially when you go like Pit 100 plus, some of those boss fights last a long time and don't really stagger the bosses very much, and most of the damage is done outside of the stagger phases. So I went for Inner Calm instead for like 5-minute plus boss fights. Other than that, you can definitely go Creeping Death, just stagger them, you do a lot of damage, you don't have to worry about standing still. So I kind of like just swapped that one aspect here. We have Vehement Brawler, another generic damage buff, also gives us ultimate skill ranks, so we get more death traps. We have the Vengeful, as I mentioned, and the Accursed Touch, which is a requirement for this setup to work. As soon as you have Accursed Touch, you can actually play this build basically from level 1 as soon as you have the Flesh Reaper's main power and the Varshan modifier. So you want to try to ramp this one up. This is your damage. Your Twisting Blades does nothing. You don't want core ranks. You don't want to invest into, core skill damage or something like that. It's all about the Varshan power. I also have a setup here where we don't have any mythics. So in case you don't have any of those available, I put in a Gauntslayer crown. Nothing super crazy. You can go with a normal helm here. I have a normal chest just to fix some armor and res if you need that, and also a normal ring, which is actually a pretty decent replacement for the starter skies, but it does make the resource management a little bit more complicated. But with some innovation ranks, you can definitely solve resources, and you can also reset your death trap more easily actually, because we use preparation. The more energy we spend, we get all of our cooldowns back with the death trap. So actually not having starter skies allows you to cast your death trap and all of the other stuff more often. And the skill tree looks like this. So we just have 1 point in the Twisting Blades because it doesn't do the damage here. We just get like a bunch of these upgrades to mostly days. Then if you don't have starter skies, you won't have any point in Penetrating Shot. So in that case, you have to put 1 point there. The reason why Penetrating Shot is in the mix is because of close quarters combat. This is our key passive down here. So you want to use your Penetrating Shot roughly once every 8 seconds so that you can activate this buff here. This is relatively powerful. You see the damage increase 229%, and you get 15% attack speed twice. And with the right amount of attack speed, you can actually reach the final attack speed breakpoint for Twisting Blades, which is 6 attacks per second. And in order to do that, you want to have 100% in cap 1, 67% in cap 2. So you can see this here as well. If you're unsure about those attack speed mechanics, I recommend to go check out this post here. We have in-depth explanation of how everything works with cap 1 and cap 2. And we have the breakpoint tables here as well. So we can go to the core skills, and we see here this breakpoint is really trying to hit 10 frames at 3.2 attacks per second. We use 2 daggers, and that makes the base attack speed 1.2. So we divide 3.2 by 1.2, and then this is the total attack speed multiplier basically. We have 1 as the base, and then 167% extra. And this is how I reach that number. The TLDR of what you need to know about this is that you want to have 70% attack speed from your primary affixes on your gear. So this includes the gloves and the 2 rings and a bit of paragons. Then you get 15% from close quarters, 15% from the potion, capping out cap 1 at 100%. And then you want to have 67% from cap 2, which is the second portion of close quarters. And then you want to have 67% from cap 2, which is the second 15% portion of close quarters. Alchemical advantage. So this is 20% when you have a Shroud of False Death. And then the rest is the cutthroat attack speed. You want to have 32% of this, which with a perfect temper and 12 out of 12 masterwork with no crit actually gives you exactly enough of what you need. But otherwise, you want to try to hit 32% and the 4 ranks here when you have a Shroud. Or if you don't have the Shroud of False Death, you might want to do a second temper, for example, in order to reach that 67% in cap 2. Everything else in the offensive temper category goes into close damage, and you also want to stack that up as much as you can, because close damage means more multiplier for your close quarters combat. And the way that I play this is actually fairly straightforward. So basically I run around, I press the death trap as kind of like the pull, and getting everything in, and then we do like one piano action for all of our cooldowns. So we press the Shadow Imbue, we press the Caltrops, we press the Poison Trap, we press the Penetrating Shot. And you just repeat that roughly every 8 seconds. And then everything else is just hold down Twisting Blades. One thing that really helps, especially once you have a starter skies in the mix, is Death Trap cooldown tempers. So when you have no starter skies, then you spend a lot more resources and you trigger preparation much faster. And you can get away with less Death Trap cooldown, for example. You can even put in another innovation temper, for example, if you're struggling with resources. But usually you should be fine with a bunch of innovation ranks that also come from the Umbra Crux, plus a temper. But you can do a second one. And the Death Trap cooldown will just make sure that it's low enough so that you just reset it every few seconds as you attack. And for the Paragon, it looks like this. There is not that many effects and glyphs that really work, but I try to like make the best out of it. So we have no witnesses, another reason to cast your Death Trap at least every 10 seconds. So you want to do that for this massive damage buff. Then we have Cheap Shot, so you're going to do a lot more damage when there's crowd-controlled enemies and staggered bosses. In general, you will do most of your damage in a staggered phase on bosses, so this is very typical rogue stuff here. Exploit Weakness is just like a ramping damage buff, and you have Eldish Bounty, so a reason to use your imbuement every 9 seconds. So as I said, roughly every 8 seconds you want to do that combo, press all of your cooldowns once, and otherwise spam the Twisting Blades as much as you can in order to deal damage. And that's also pretty much it for the setup. So here's just another example of me running in a Pit 105. You see I'm easily doubling the timer on this, and as I mentioned, this is not optimized at all. And in these higher pit tiers, you will also notice the huge difference between AoE combat and single target combat. You can ramp this up to trillions of dot ticks per second, basically, when there's like 5 to 10 targets or something. Most of the time when you press Death Trap and you pull in a bunch of enemies, then everything will just explode instantly. You may lag out a little bit, but compared to what I've seen from other classes, the lags are not that bad on the Twisting Blade setup. But on the higher tiers, when you have the large pull, you definitely notice like this here that, you know, it gets a little bit weird. And you want to like optimize around that. So for example, you can first throw down the poison trap and the caltrops, activate your penetrating shot, and then do the Death Trap pull in. And while you're already attacking with all the buffs up, it will just resolve the lag in a matter of seconds and you're going to be fine. So just keep that in mind. It might be a bit dangerous on hardcore especially, but I didn't have any trouble. The setup is fairly tanky as well because we have the barriers from Second Wind, since you're spamming the Twisting Blades so much that we constantly spend a lot of energy and we get the barrier back. And like this, you're pretty safe. So that's it for the build. I had a ton of fun playing some Twisting Blades again. Of course, there is also the regular Twisting Blades that we have on Maxwell. You can go check that out. That is actually based on the damage of Twisting Blades and also has stuff like Shadow Clone and so on. But I really enjoyed playing like a very old school setup effectively with like this Shadow Imbuement and just spamming Twisting Blades. It was a ton of fun. So let's see if that will be patched or not. But for now, this is what I got. So hope you enjoyed this build here. Wish you good luck with the Twisting Blades, and I'll see you guys next time.